The Texas wind cut through the empty plains like a knife, carrying dust and the smell of dry earth. Henry and Martha stood hand in hand, staring at what was left of their cabin, a structure that mirrored their own broken hearts. The wood was cracked and grey, weathered by years of storms and neglect. Planks hung loose and the roof sagged like tired shoulders. This place, once filled with the laughter of 3 children, now stood silent as a graveyard. 42 years, Henry, Martha whispered, her voice barely audible. 42 years we gave to this place. And to them. Henry squeezed her hand tighter. His fingers, rough from decades of hard work, trembled slightly. What could he say? That their eldest son, David, had signed the eviction notice himself. That their daughter, Rebecca, hadn't called in 3 years. That their youngest, Michael, told them they were too much of a burden. A thin, stray dog circled their feet, whimpering softly. The poor thing was all bones and matted fur, but its eyes looked at them with more loyalty than their own flesh and blood ever had. "Okay, at least someone still wants to be near us," Martha said, bending down to pat the dog's head. Her knees cracked as she moved, and Henry reached out to steady her. She clutched an envelope in her coat pocket, the final notice. 30 days to leave, 30 days before the bank took everything. The same bank where David worked as a manager. Inside the cabin, through the broken door, they could see the remnants of a life. A kitchen table propped up by old books, shattered photo frames, and a wooden cross Henry had carved when hope still lived in their hearts. What they would soon discover inside those ruins would change their lives forever. But right now, standing in the cold, they couldn't see past the pain. "Are we going to make it through this?" Martha asked, her voice breaking. Henry looked at the cabin, then at his wife, then at the dog. "We're still breathing, Martha. That means God isn't done with us yet." Somewhere deep inside that broken structure, hidden beneath years of dust and heartache, something waited. But for now they had only the wind, the ruins, and each other. They stepped inside, the door groaning in pain. The stray dog followed close behind. Martha's eyes went straight to a photograph on the wall. 3 faces smiled back at her. David in his business suit, Rebecca in her nursing scrubs, Michael in his teacher's cap. "Look at them," Martha whispered. "Look how proud they were." Henry stood behind her, the eviction notice crumpling in his trembling hands. "Henry." Martha turned. That's when she saw it. The signature at the bottom of the notice. David's signature, their eldest boy. "He said we were too much of a burden, Martha." Henry's voice broke. Those were his exact words. The silence was heavier than anything they'd ever carried. Martha sank into an old armchair. "I called Rebecca last month," she said, her voice muffled. "Told her about your heart condition. She said she'd send money, never did. Then she changed her number." Henry lowered himself onto the edge of the kitchen table. The dog rested its head on his knee. "Michael won't even answer when I call," he added. "I left him 17 messages, Martha. 17, not one call back." "How did we get here?" Martha looked around the cabin. "We gave them everything. We ate beans and rice for years so they could have better." "I know, sweetheart, I know. And this is what we get, an eviction notice signed by our own son." Henry folded the notice and put it in his shirt pocket, right over his failing heart. "Maybe we weren't good enough parents," he said quietly. "Don't you dare." Martha stood up fast. "Don't you dare blame yourself, Henry Thompson. We loved those children with everything we had. This isn't on us." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her eyes. That terrible question that eats you alive. What did I do wrong? That night, as darkness swallowed the Texas plains, Henry and Martha lay on their old mattress, listening to the wind howl. The stray dog whimpered at the foot of their bed. "Come here, boy," Martha whispered, patting the space between them. The dog hesitated, then slowly climbed up and curled into a tight ball. Its body was warmer than anything in that freezing cabin. "We should give him a name," Henry said, running his rough hand over the dog's matted fur. Martha thought for a moment. "Buddy, let's call him Buddy." "Buddy," Henry repeated. "Yeah, that fits. He's the only buddy we got left in this world." The dog lifted his head and licked Henry's hand. That one gesture said more than 1,000 words. Over the next few days, Buddy became their real family. Martha would open the nearly empty pantry each morning, A few cans of beans, some stale crackers, and she'd break off pieces for Buddy first, even when her own stomach was growling. "Martha, you have to eat," Henry would say. "He needs it more. Look at him, Henry. He's all skin and bones." "So are you, sweetheart." But she was stubborn. Buddy seemed to understand their pain. When Martha cried, he would rest his head in her lap. When Henry's chest hurt, Buddy would press against his leg, warm and solid. One evening, watching the sunset, Martha said, "I think God sent him to us. When our own children turned their backs, God sent us someone who wouldn't." She stroked Buddy's head gently. David, Rebecca, Michael, they had every comfort. But this dog, he's got nothing. And yet he stays. He guards us, keeps us warm, and gives us everything. That night, when the temperature dropped below freezing, Buddy positioned himself right by the door, facing out. Every sound made his ears prick up. He was guarding them. "See that?" Henry whispered to Martha. "He's watching over us." "I know," she whispered back, tears in her eyes. "More loyalty in that dog's heart than in all three of our children combined." It was a painful truth, but somehow having Buddy there, having someone who chose to stay when everyone else had left, made the abandonment a little more bearable. Outside, the wind sang its lonely song. But inside that broken cabin, three souls huddled together against the cold, two abandoned parents and one faithful dog. And for the first time in weeks, they slept through the night. It was their 23rd day in the cabin, when the sky turned the color of a bruise. Henry stood at the broken window, watching dark clouds roll across the Texas plains like an army marching to war. The air felt heavy, thick, the kind of heavy that makes your lungs work harder just to breathe. "Storm's coming," he said, his voice tight with worry. Martha looked up from where she sat mending one of Henry's old shirts with thread she'd pulled from another piece of clothing. Buddy lay at her feet, his ears already flat against his head. Animals always knew before humans did. "How bad do you think it'll be?" she asked. Henry didn't answer right away. He'd lived on these plains his whole life. He knew that silence before a storm. He knew what it meant when the wind stopped completely, like the earth itself was holding its breath. "Bad," he finally said. "Real bad." The first drops hit the roof like bullets. Then the wind came, not gradually, but all at once, like something had been unleashed. The cabin started shaking, and that sagging roof groaned under the pressure. "Henry!" Martha shouted over the noise. He rushed to her, pulling her close as the storm hit with full force. Rain poured through every crack, every hole, every weak spot in that already broken structure. Water streamed down the walls like rivers. The temperature dropped so fast their breath came out in clouds. Then came the lightning. The first bolt lit up the entire cabin, bright as daylight, and in that flash they saw everything. The water pooling on the floor, the walls bowing inward, the ceiling starting to cave. Buddy howled, a long, terrified sound that cut through even the thunder. "We gotta move," Henry yelled, trying to guide Martha toward the corner that seemed most stable. But his chest, oh God, his chest was tightening, that familiar pain spreading like fire. "Henry? Henry, what's wrong?" Martha saw him clutch his shirt, saw his face go pale. "I'm okay. Another lightning strike, closer this time. And with it came a sound like the world breaking in half. The entire left side of the cabin's roof collapsed, taking half the wall with it. Wooden beams crashed down, missing them by inches. Rain poured in like someone had opened a faucet in the sky. Martha grabbed her old Bible from the table, the only thing besides each other and Buddy that mattered anymore. She held it against her chest as Henry covered her with his coat. His arms wrapped around her even as his heart hammered dangerously in his chest. "If this is the end, Lord," Martha whispered, her voice shaking but clear, "let us end in your arms. We've got nowhere else to go, nobody else who wants us. But you never abandoned us. If you're calling us home, we're ready." Buddy pressed against them both, howling again as another section of roof gave way. The rain was everywhere now, soaking them to the bone. Lightning lit up their faces. Henry's twisted in pain, Martha's streaming with tears, Buddy's eyes wide with fear. "I love you, Martha," Henry gasped out, holding her tighter. 42 years, and I'd do it all again." "I love you too, Henry Thompson. I love you too." The storm raged on, tearing their shelter apart piece by piece. The photograph of their children fell from the wall, glass shattering across the wet floor. They huddled together in that corner, two old people and a dog, waiting to see if they'd survive the night. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the wind shifted. The rain began to ease, the thunder rolled away. They were still breathing, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a miracle. What they would find in the wreckage would change everything. 3 days after the storm, Henry and Martha stood in what was left of their cabin. Half the roof was gone. The photo of their children lay face down in a puddle, the glass frame shattered. "We got 7 days left," Henry said quietly, looking at the eviction notice still in his pocket. 7 days before the bank comes. Martha bent down, her knees protesting, and started picking up broken boards. Buddy sniffed around the debris, sensing their despair. "What are we even doing, Henry? Cleaning up so the bank can take it easier?" "Don't," Henry interrupted. "We ain't giving up, not yet." They worked in silence for hours, moving pieces of their broken life. It felt pointless. That's when Martha noticed something. Where the floorboards had split open, there was a gap, and in that gap, something metallic caught the light. "Henry, come look at this." He walked over, and Martha was on her knees, pulling at a loose board. Underneath was a metal box. Old, rusted. "What in the world?" Henry knelt beside her, ignoring the pain in his chest. Together they worked the box free. Henry used a piece of broken metal to pry it open. The lid finally gave way with a screech. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a small envelope. Martha's hands shook as she unfolded the paper, her father's handwriting. He'd been gone for over 30 years. "It's from Daddy," she whispered. Henry leaned in as she read aloud, her voice breaking. "My dearest Martha, if you're reading this, then I'm long gone. This land, these 20 acres, they're yours. Your mother and I bought them with every penny we had. Times will get hard, sweetheart. But listen to me. Never sell this land, never give it up. God will restore what was broken. He always does. The money in this envelope isn't much, but use it when you need it most. And remember, you are loved, you are worthy, your loving father." Tears rolled down Martha's face. She opened the envelope. Inside were old bills. She counted them quickly. $340. Not a fortune, but more than they had. Henry pulled her close, his own eyes wet. "He knew," she sobbed. "Daddy knew we'd need this someday." Right then, the sun broke through the clouds. Golden light poured through the holes in the roof, illuminating the metal box, the letter, the money, illuminating them. Buddy barked once joyfully. Could $340 and a father's words be enough to save them? Or was this just one last cruel taste of hope? The next morning, Henry woke up before sunrise. His chest still ached, but something had changed inside him. Hope. "Where you going?" Martha asked sleepily. "To the hardware store. We got money now. Enough to buy some nails, some boards. Enough to start fixing this place. Henry, you count your heart, and my heart's gonna give out whether I'm lying in bed waiting to die or out there fighting to live," he said, his voice firm. "I'd rather go down swinging." By noon, he was back with supplies, wood planks, nails, a hammer. He stood there looking at the destroyed cabin, and for a moment, doubt crept in. How could one old man with a failing heart rebuild this? But then Buddy came running, tail wagging, and Martha stepped out with 2 glasses of water. "We do it together," she said simply. "One board at a time." And that's exactly what they did. Henry's hands shook as he lifted the first board. The hammer felt heavy as lead. Every swing sent pain shooting through his chest, but he didn't stop. Martha worked beside him, holding boards steady, handing him nails, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Take a break, Henry," she'd say every hour. "One more board," he'd answer. Always one more. Days passed. Slow, painful, beautiful. The cabin started taking shape again. Not perfect, but standing, rising from the ruins. On the 5th day, Martha found a packet of wildflower seeds. She knelt in the stubborn Texas dirt and started digging small holes with her bare hands. "Martha, we got 6 more days before—" "I know how many days we got," she interrupted. "If no one remembers us, Henry, if our children have forgotten we exist, at least the earth will remember. These flowers will grow, they'll be here long after we're gone." Henry watched her plant those seeds one by one. That evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, Henry hammered the last board into place on the east wall. His arms felt like rubber, his chest burned. But the wall was up. Solid, strong. Martha sat on the porch steps, her lips moving silently in prayer. Dust floated in the golden evening light. Buddy ran circles in the yard, happy to be alive. The sound of Henry's hammer echoed across the plains, strike after strike, each one saying, "We're still here, we're still fighting." And for the first time since their children had abandoned them, Henry and Martha felt something dangerous and wonderful. They felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. But with only 2 days left before the bank came to take it all, would their rebuilt cabin be enough? Or was this just a beautiful goodbye to the only home they'd ever known? 4 months had passed since that desperate day when the storm nearly took everything. 4 months since they'd found Martha's father's letter and that $340. 4 months of rebuilding, replanting, and rediscovering what it meant to have faith when the whole world had turned its back. The cabin stood proud now, not fancy but solid. New boards replaced the rotten ones. The roof no longer leaked. Martha's wildflowers had bloomed into a riot of color near the window, defying that stubborn Texas soil. And Henry, well, his heart still gave him trouble, but he was alive. More than alive. He was living. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the cars pulled up. 3 vehicles, expensive ones, the kind that kicked up dust on those dirt roads like they owned the place. Buddy barked from the porch, his hackles rising. He knew. Animals always know when something is wrong. Henry and Martha were sitting on the porch, the one Henry had rebuilt with his own trembling hands, drinking iced tea and watching the wildflowers dance in the breeze. When they saw who stepped out of those cars, the glasses nearly slipped from their hands. David, Rebecca, Michael, their children, after all these months of silence. "Mom, Dad?" Rebecca called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She was dressed like she was going to a business meeting, not visiting her parents. "Oh my God, you're here! We were so worried." Worried. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Henry stood slowly, his hand on Martha's shoulder. She was shaking, not from fear, but from anger so deep it made her whole body tremble. "Worried," Henry repeated flatly. "That's interesting, considering we haven't heard from any of you since you signed that eviction notice, David." David had the decency to look uncomfortable, but only for a second. "Dad, look, I know things got complicated, but—" "Complicated?" Martha's voice was ice. "You threw us out. You called us a burden. You changed your numbers. You abandoned us." Michael stepped forward, his teacher's smile plastered on his face. "Mom, we're here now, aren't we? And look at this place. You fixed it up real nice. Must have cost a pretty penny." There it was. The reason they'd come. "We heard some news," Rebecca said, unable to hide the greed in her eyes anymore. "There's talk in town. About this land. About what might be under it. Oil," David said bluntly. "There might be oil under this property. We checked the county records. If there is, this land could be worth millions." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Henry looked at his 3 children, these strangers wearing familiar faces, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not even sadness, just a quiet, devastating clarity. "You left us when we were nothing," he said calmly, each word measured and clear. "You threw us away like garbage when we needed you most, when your mother was crying herself to sleep every night, when my heart was failing and we didn't know if I'd make it through the week. You weren't there. But we found everything when we found faith again," Martha added, standing beside her husband, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "We found out what real loyalty looks like." She gestured to Buddy, who sat protectively between them and their children. "We found out that family ain't always blood. Sometimes it's a stray dog who stayed when everyone else left." David's jaw tightened. "So what? You're gonna let some dog inherit your land instead of your own children." "This land," Henry said, pulling the deed from his pocket, the deed he'd saved from the storm, "belongs to me and Martha, not to you, not to anyone who only shows up when there's money involved." Rebecca's mask slipped. "You're seriously choosing that mutt over your own kids?" "No," Martha said softly. "You chose money over us. We're just living with your choice." Would Henry and Martha's faith be enough to withstand their children's greed? And what would happen when the truth about the land was finally revealed? The confrontation with their children left Henry and Martha drained. After David, Rebecca, and Michael drove away, angry and empty-handed, the old couple sat on their porch in heavy silence. "Did we do the right thing?" Martha finally asked, her voice small. "Yes," Henry said firmly. "We did." But doubt gnawed at them both. What if there really was oil? What if they'd just turned away a fortune? They weren't getting any younger. Henry's medicine cost money they barely had. What if they'd been foolish? 2 days later, a truck pulled up. This time it wasn't their children. It was the county water inspector, a weathered man named Tom who'd known Henry for 30 years. "Henry, Martha," Tom said, tipping his hat, "got a call about doing a land survey out here. Something about mineral rights." "Our kids," Henry said bitterly. "They filed paperwork to force an inspection, looking for oil that probably ain't even there." Tom nodded sympathetically. "Well, I gotta do my job. Mind if I look around?" "Go ahead," Martha sighed. "We got nothing to hide." Tom walked the property with his equipment, Buddy following close behind like a furry supervisor. Henry and Martha watched from the porch, holding hands, preparing themselves for whatever came next. After about an hour, Tom came running back. Actually running. His face was lit up like he'd seen something miraculous. "Henry, Martha, you gotta see this." They followed him to the east side of the property, the area where the storm had hit hardest, where the ground had been torn up and reshaped by wind and rain. There, bubbling up from the earth, was water, clear, fresh water, flowing like a small stream from a crack in the rock that hadn't been there before the storm. "I'll be," Henry whispered. Tom knelt down, testing the water with his equipment. "This is fresh spring water, pure as it gets. The storm must have shifted something underground, opened up an aquifer that's been here for who knows how long." He stood up, shaking his head in amazement. "Henry, do you know what this means?" Henry and Martha just stared at the water, flowing and flowing, life pouring out of the ground where there'd been nothing but drought and dust for years. "This is worth more than oil out here," Tom continued. "Fresh water in Texas during a drought. You could bottle this, sell it to the town. People are desperate for clean water. This is a gold mine." Martha's knees gave out. She sat right there on the ground, watching that water flow, tears streaming down her face. "My father's letter," she whispered. "God will restore what was broken. He said God would restore what was broken." The news spread through the small town like wildfire. By the next day, folks were driving out to see it for themselves. The spring that appeared after the storm, the water that saved the old couple everyone thought would lose everything. Old Mrs. Henderson from the general store was the one who named it. She stood there with her grandkids watching the water flow and said, "This ain't just water. This is mercy. Pure mercy flowing from the ground. That's what this is. The spring of mercy." And the name stuck. Within a week, Henry and Martha had signed contracts with the town. The water would be shared, some for the community, some they could sell. It wasn't millions like oil might have been, but it was enough. More than enough. It was sustainable income that would keep them comfortable for the rest of their lives. David called that night. So did Rebecca and Michael. Suddenly, they wanted to reconcile. Suddenly, they cared again. Henry let the phone ring, and ring, and ring. Martha watered her wildflowers with water from the spring, Buddy lying in the grass nearby. And she smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "You know what, Henry? I think we're going to be just fine." But could Henry and Martha truly forgive their children? And would the water that saved them also heal the wounds that cut the deepest? Sound of gentle, resilient acoustic guitar music. 6 months. Half a year since the storm that nearly destroyed them. Half a year since they found that metal box and Martha's father's letter. Half a year since they'd rebuilt everything, not just the cabin, but their lives, their hope, their faith. The sun was setting over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made you believe in miracles. Martha sat on the porch Henry had rebuilt with his own trembling hands, with Buddy curled up at her feet. Her old Bible lay open in her lap, its pages worn soft from years of reading. She'd been sitting there for an hour, just thinking, remembering. She remembered the day David signed that eviction notice, the day Rebecca promised money and never sent it, the day Michael stopped answering their calls. She remembered standing in front of this broken cabin, wondering if they'd survive the week. She remembered the storm, the fear, the cold, the moment she thought they were going to die right there in each other's arms. And she remembered the morning after. The sun breaking through the clouds, the metal box, her father's words, the beginning of everything changing. "We thought we'd lost everything," Martha whispered to herself, her voice catching, "but God never lost us." Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks, not tears of sadness anymore, but something deeper, something that felt like gratitude mixed with wonder, mixed with the kind of peace that comes when you've walked through fire and somehow made it to the other side. The screen door creaked open. Henry stepped out, moving slower these days, but still here, still breathing, still fighting. He'd just taken his heart medication, the medication they could now afford thanks to the spring. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside Martha and placed his hand over hers. His rough, calloused hand that had built and rebuilt their life, that had held her through every storm, literal and otherwise. The golden light of sunset filled their faces, making them look younger somehow. Or maybe not younger, maybe just lighter, like they'd finally put down a burden they'd been carrying for too long. Wind chimes that Martha had hung last week made soft music in the breeze. Birds called to each other in the distance, settling in for the night. The sound of water from the Spring of Mercy provided a gentle backdrop, constant, reliable, life-giving. Buddy stretched and yawned, then rested his head on Martha's foot, content. "You know what the hardest part was?" Martha finally said, her voice quiet. "What's that, sweetheart?" "Forgiving them. David, Rebecca, Michael. Forgiving them for leaving us." She paused, watching the sun sink lower. "But I think I finally have. Not because they deserve it, not because they asked for it, but because holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting them to die." Henry squeezed her hand. "I know what you mean. I've been working on that too." "They still call sometimes," Martha continued. "Still leave messages about wanting to reconnect. But it isn't the same, can't be the same. They showed us who they really are when things got hard. But we also learned who we really are," Henry said. "We learned we're stronger than we thought, that God provides in ways we never expected, that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's a dog that stayed when everyone else left." As if understanding, Buddy's tail thumped against the porch. Martha closed her Bible gently and looked out at their land, at the cabin that stood proud and strong, at the wildflowers blooming near the window, at the path leading to the spring that had saved them, at the life they'd built from ruins. 42 years of marriage," she said softly, "and somehow sitting here with you right now after everything we've been through, this is the happiest I've ever been." Henry turned to look at her, his eyes wet. "Me too, Martha. Me too." They sat there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, hand in hand with Buddy at their feet, surrounded by the gentle music of wind chimes and birds and flowing water. Peace. After all the pain, finally, peace. But would this peace last? Or was there one final lesson waiting in the shadows? 1 year, 365 days since that cold morning when Henry and Martha stood before their broken cabin, abandoned by their children, wondering if they'd make it through another week. Now, on this particular Sunday morning, their cabin looked like something out of a dream. Fresh paint, a soft cream color Martha had chosen, new shutters on the windows, a garden full of wildflowers that refused to quit blooming, and that porch, the porch where they'd cried so many tears, now held 2 rocking chairs and a small table where they drank their morning coffee. The Spring of Mercy flowed steady in the distance, its water feeding the whole community now. Folks came from miles around, not just for the water, but to hear the story. The story of two people who lost everything and found that everything they needed had been there all along. "You ready?" Henry asked Martha, straightening his tie. They were headed to church service in town, something they did every Sunday now. "Almost," Martha said, adjusting the wildflower she'd pinned to her dress. "Just gotta say goodbye to Buddy." The dog, no longer skin and bones but healthy and content, wagged his tail from his spot in the sun. He'd gotten older too, grayer around the muzzle, but those eyes still held that same loyalty that had saved them when they needed it most. "We'll be back soon, boy," Martha said, scratching behind his ears. "You guard the house now." As they drove into town in their old pickup, still running, still faithful, Martha looked back at their property, at everything they'd built from nothing, at the testimony their lives had become. "Henry, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd given up? If we'd just walked away when the storm hit?" Henry was quiet for a moment, then said, "Every day, and every day I thank God we didn't." At church, people greeted them like family, real family. Not the kind that only shows up when there's something to gain, but the kind that brings casseroles when you're sick and sits with you when you're lonely. After the service, a young woman approached Martha. She was crying, clutching a tissue in her trembling hand. "Mrs. Thompson, my name's Sarah. I had to talk to you. My husband left me last month, took everything. I've been living in my car with my 2 kids and I didn't know if I could keep going. But then I heard your story, about how you and Mr. Thompson survived when your own children abandoned you, about the storm and the spring and—" Her voice broke. "It gave me hope. If you could make it through that, maybe I can make it through this." Martha pulled the young woman into a hug, tears flowing down both their faces. "Baby, listen to me. You can make it. You will make it. God sees you. He hasn't forgotten you. I promise." That evening, as the sun set once more over the Texas plains, Henry and Martha sat on their porch, their rebuilt, beautiful porch, watching the golden light paint everything in shades of grace. You know what I realized today?" Martha said, holding Henry's hand. "Our story isn't just ours anymore. It belongs to everyone who's ever felt forgotten, everyone who's ever been abandoned, everyone who's ever stood in the ruins of their life and wondered if there was any point in going on." "We're a testimony," Henry agreed. "A living testimony that God can take the broken pieces and make something beautiful." Buddy barked once, as if adding his amen. The cabin, rebuilt, restored, glowing under the evening sun, stood as a monument to faith, resilience, and the kind of love that doesn't quit even when everything else does. They were abandoned by their children, yes, but never by God. From the ruins, He raised a new home, a new life, a new testimony for every heart that's been forgotten, every soul that's been cast aside, every person who's ever wondered if they mattered. And as the last light faded and the stars began to appear over the empty plains, one truth remained clear as the water from that miraculous spring. Sometimes what breaks you is exactly what God uses to build your miracle. Listen, friend. If you're watching this story right now, maybe it's because you needed to hear it. Maybe you're going through your own storm. Maybe your own children, your own family, people you trusted with your whole heart. Maybe they walked away. Maybe you're standing in front of your own broken cabin wondering if it's even worth rebuilding. Let me tell you something, it is worth it. Henry and Martha could have given up, they had every reason to, but they didn't. And that choice, that one stubborn choice to keep going, changed everything. Here's my question for you. What broken pieces are you holding on to right now? What storm are you surviving? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Because you can sit in those ruins forever, or you can pick up a hammer and start rebuilding. One board at a time, one prayer at a time, one day at a time. What's your spring of mercy going to be? What miracle is waiting under the surface of your suffering, just waiting for you to have the faith to keep digging? Don't let your story end in abandonment. Don't let the people who walked away define who you become. You are more than what was done to you. You are more than who left you. You are a testimony waiting to happen. If this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell. Because there are more stories like this, stories of real people who survived real pain and found real miracles on the other side. And you need to hear them. We all do, and hey, don't stop here. Click on that video appearing on your screen right now. Another powerful story of faith, resilience, and miracles born from suffering. Your next source of hope is just one click away. Remember, sometimes what breaks you is exactly what God uses to build your miracle. Now go rebuild your life. I believe in you. God believes in you. And like Buddy the dog, we're staying right here with you every step of the way.